The slap echoed through the marble hallway like a gunshot. Samson Kern, Korea's most feared mafia boss, sat motionless in his downtown security office, watching the surveillance monitor with hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. On the screen, a woman in designer heels walked into his father's bedroom at 11:47 p.m. No hesitation, no warning, just straight to the wheelchair by the window where a helpless old man sat staring at a garden he could no longer walk through. She hit him hard enough to snap his head sideways. "I'm so tired of looking at your pathetic face." The woman was Lucia, his girlfriend of 6 months. The woman he'd defended against every warning. The woman he'd chosen over his own father's desperate pleas. The woman he'd brought into their home. For 17 minutes, Samson watched footage that turned his blood to ice. He watched her beat a man who couldn't fight back. Heard her mock his father's whispered pleas. Saw her dump medication bottles into the trash with a smile that made even a killer like him feel sick. "Your son doesn't believe you," she hissed at the broken man in the wheelchair. "He's so desperate for love that he can't see what's right in front of him." She was right. For 6 months, Samson had been blind. The legendary instincts that had kept him alive in Seoul's criminal underworld for 15 years, gone. Overridden by loneliness, by the desperate need to be loved for something other than the fear he inspired. 6 months ago, he thought he'd found someone who understood him. Tonight, he realized he'd invited a predator into his family. But what this mafia boss did next shocked everyone, including himself. Because the person who demanded mercy for this monster wasn't Samson, the man with unlimited power for revenge. It was the victim. Before we go deeper, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next. But to understand why a father would forgive the woman who tortured him, and why Korea's most ruthless crime lord would listen, you need to understand who these men really were. Samson Kern wasn't born a monster. He was made into one. At 32, he commanded the most powerful criminal empire in South Korea. When he walked into a room, conversations stopped. When he gave an order, people moved. When he decided someone was a problem, that person ceased to exist, cleanly, quietly, permanently. Politicians feared him. Rival organizations avoided him. Even his own men watched him with a mixture of loyalty and terror. But power came with a price: isolation. Everyone wanted something from him. Loyalty was purchased, not earned. Women saw his wealth and influence, not the man beneath. Every smile hid calculation. Every friendship had an angle. Samson had everything except the one thing he craved most: someone who loved him for who he was, not what he could give them. Then he met Lucia at an underground art auction in Gangnam. She was different, or so he thought. She saw through his reputation, asked questions no one else dared, challenged him with a fearlessness that felt like authenticity. He fell fast. He fell hard. And he felt completely blind. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think Samson should have done. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next video. 6 months earlier, before the surveillance footage, before the betrayal, before everything fell apart, Samson Kern stood in the back of an underground art auction in Gangnam watching a woman outbid 3 wealthy collectors without breaking a sweat. The auction house was disguised as a private gallery, the kind where invitations were whispered, not written. Where art changed hands for prices that would never appear in any legal ledger. Samson came to these events the way other men went to bars, looking for distraction from the weight of running an empire where trust was currency and betrayal was breath. The woman wore a black dress that was elegant without trying too hard. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders. She held her paddle with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and had no doubt she'd get it. 20 million won, she called out in perfect Korean, her American accent barely noticeable. Samson found himself moving closer, weaving through the crowd of Seoul's elite criminals and corrupt politicians. Something about her pulled him forward. Maybe it was the way she stood alone in a room full of power players. Maybe it was the fearlessness in her voice when she bid against men who could make people disappear. When the gavel fell and the Ming Dynasty vase was hers, she turned and locked eyes with him across the room. She didn't look away, didn't blush or pretend she hadn't noticed him staring. She just smiled, small and knowing, then walked toward the payment desk. Samson followed. "You have excellent taste," he said as she signed the acquisition papers with a name he'd later learn was partially fabricated. She glanced up, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, calculating in a way he mistook for confidence, met his. "So do you, apparently. I saw you watching me bid. Hard not to. You just outbid Park Industries' CEO and made it look easy. Men like him expect women to be timid." She handed the papers back to the clerk. "I've found that confusing their expectations gives you an advantage." Samson laughed, genuinely. When was the last time someone had surprised him? "I'm Samson. Lucia." She extended her hand, and when he took it, her grip was firm. Not trying to prove anything, just present. Solid. Real. "What brings an American woman to Seoul's less advertised art scene?" he asked. "I could ask you the same question, though I suspect you're not here for the art." She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. "You're Samson Kern. You run the largest distribution network in South Korea. You're connected to half the politicians in the National Assembly. And you haven't smiled genuinely at anyone in approximately 7 years. His blood went cold for half a second. Then hot. No one spoke to him like this. No one admitted they knew who he was, what he did. The smart ones pretended ignorance. "Should I be concerned that you know so much about me?" His voice dropped, taking on the edge that usually made people backtrack. "Only if you're concerned about spending the evening with someone who isn't intimidated by your reputation." She picked up the small vase, cradling it carefully. "I'm having dinner at Mingle's in an hour. The reservation is under my name. Show up if you're interested in continuing this conversation. Don't if you're not." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing in the middle of Seoul's criminal elite, watching her disappear through the gallery doors. Samson showed up 40 minutes later. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he sat across from her at that intimate table, laughing at her stories about navigating Korean business culture, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight for a decade. Was that every word she spoke had been rehearsed? Every smile calculated, every coincidence manufactured. She'd spent 3 months researching him before stepping into that auction house. Knew his preferences in art, his favorite restaurants, his weakness for confidence wrapped in beauty. She knew he was lonely. Knew he was desperate for connection in a world where everyone wanted something from him. And she knew exactly how to become the woman he'd been waiting for. Within 3 weeks, Lucia had moved into the Kern family mansion. Within 6, she'd positioned herself between Samson and the one person who could see through her perfectly constructed lie. But that night, sitting across from her as she spoke about art and ambition and the isolation that comes with being underestimated, Samson felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. And that hope would nearly cost him everything. The hope Samson felt that night would be tested within 72 hours of bringing Lucia home. And the test would come from the one man whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. John Kern sat in his study when Samson introduced Lucia, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. The stroke 2 years earlier had left him dependent on a cane, his left hand trembling as it rested on the armrest. But his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes that had built an empire through 5 decades of blood and strategy, were as sharp as ever. He looked at Lucia for exactly 7 seconds. Then he looked at his son. "We need to talk. Alone." Lucia touched Samson's arm gently. "It's okay. I'll wait in the garden." She left with grace, closing the door without a sound. The moment the latch clicked, John spoke. "She doesn't love you." Samson's jaw tightened. "You don't even know her." "I know her type." John leaned forward. "She loves what you represent. The power, the money, the name. Not you. That's not fair. You just met her. I just watched her. The way she touched your arm, calculated. The way she left this room, too perfect. She's performing, Samson." Heat rose in Samson's chest. "You're paranoid. The stroke, the medication, it's making you see threats that aren't there." "The stroke didn't damage my mind, son." John's voice hardened. "I've spent 50 years reading people. That woman is dangerous. She's different. She sees me, not just what I can give her. Does she? Or does she see exactly what she wants you to think?" John pushed himself up. "Did she ask about your interests or did she already know them? Did she seem surprised by anything or did she have all the right answers ready?" The questions hit close. Lucia had known his favorite artist, his thoughts on politics, his preference for whiskey over wine. At the time, it felt like fate. Now it felt different. You're wrong, Samson said. I hope I am. John moved toward the window. But I've buried men who fell for women like her, Samson. Good men. Strong men. Men who thought they were too smart to be played. You don't know her, Samson repeated harder. John turned, and Samson saw something he'd never seen before. Fear. Not of Lucia. Fear for his son. Then prove me wrong. Keep her at arm's length. Watch her. Test her. I'm not going to test her like she's some threat. Why not? You test everyone else. Every business partner, every associate. But her? She gets a free pass? Because she's different. Then you've already lost. The words hung like smoke. Samson felt his hands ball into fists. I think we're done here, Samson said, voice cold. Samson, I said we're done. He walked out, and the distance that opened between them would only grow wider. By dinner, word had spread. The old guard watched Lucia with suspicious eyes. The younger members dismissed the concerns as paranoia. The Kern family was splitting. And Lucia, sitting at Samson's side, noticed everything. She saw the divided loyalty. She saw the weakness. She saw the opportunity. What Samson couldn't see was the small smile that crossed her face when John excused himself early. She was winning, and the real war hadn't even started yet. The war had started, but Samson wouldn't realize it until it was almost too late. Because Lucia's greatest weapon wasn't violence or threats, it was becoming exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed it. 3 days after the confrontation with his father, Samson came home exhausted. A deal had gone bad. $2 million lost because someone talked. He'd spent 14 hours cleaning up the mess. Lucia was waiting in his room. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand attention. She simply walked behind him and began working out the knots in his shoulders with practiced precision. You carry too much, she whispered. You don't have to be strong every second. Something in Samson's chest loosened. When was the last time someone touched him without wanting something? My father thinks you're using me, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Her hands paused for half a second, then continued, steady and soothing. I know. I can feel it every time he looks at me. He said you don't love me. That you love what I represent. Her hands stopped completely. She walked around to face him, and her eyes were wet. Is that what you think? Her voice was small, wounded. That I'm here for your money? No, because if that's what you believe, then what are we even doing? A tear rolled down her cheek. I left everything in the States to be here. I walked away from my career, my friends, my entire life because I thought I'd found someone who saw me as more than just another pretty face. Lucia, I didn't mean. Do you know how hard it is to be me in your world? I'm a white American woman dating Korea's most powerful crime lord. Everyone already thinks I'm a gold digger. Your father just says it out loud. Samson stood, reaching for her. I don't think that. Then why bring it up? She pulled away. Why even question us? Because he's my father. About you or about losing control over you? She looked at him, tears streaming. He doesn't own you. You're not a child who needs permission to be happy. The words hit perfectly. Every insecurity about his father's control, about being treated like a child, about being John's shadow, she'd identified them all. You're right, Samson said. Am I? Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like no matter what I do, it won't be enough. Your father will always be there, poisoning the well. He won't. I'll talk to him. And say what? Men like him never accept people like me. She wiped her eyes. Maybe I should just leave. Maybe it would be easier if I went back to the States. Panic flooded Samson's chest. No, don't say that. Why not? If you're going to question whether I love you every time. I'm not questioning. He grabbed her hands. I'm not. I believe you. I trust you. Do you? She looked up, vulnerable and broken. Do you really? Yes. She collapsed against his chest, and he held her while she cried. Held her while she whispered she'd never felt this way. Held her while she made him promise he wouldn't let his father come between them. And Samson made a choice. He chose her over the man who'd raised him. Over the instincts that had kept him alive. Over the warning signs. He chose wrong. What Samson didn't see, what he couldn't see with her face buried in his chest, was the way Lucia's tears stopped the moment he made his promise. The way she smiled. She'd won this round without Samson even realizing there was a fight. But the real test was coming. Because loving words and manufactured tears could only carry her so far. Soon, she'd need to make John disappear completely. And she already had a plan. Lucia's plan began with something simple: food. The morning after Samson chose her over his father's warnings, she woke early. Samson was still asleep when she slipped downstairs in silk pajamas, hair perfectly tousled, looking every bit the woman in love. The kitchen staff was preparing breakfast. John's tray sat ready: warm rice porridge, steamed vegetables, green tea, his morning medications arranged in a small cup. "I'll take that to him," Lucia said, her smile bright and helpful. The head cook hesitated. "Miss Lucia, Mr. John prefers." "I know what he prefers." Her smile didn't waver, but her voice dropped half a degree. "I'm part of this family now. I should help care for him, don't you think?" The cook nodded, uncertain but unwilling to challenge the boss's girlfriend. Lucia carried the tray upstairs. But she didn't go to John's room. She went to the library down the hall, set the tray on a side table near the window, and left it there. Then she returned to Samson's room and crawled back into bed. 3 hours later, when John's physical therapist arrived for his morning session, she found him weak and shaking. "Mr. Kern, did you eat breakfast?" No one brought it. At lunch, the same thing happened. Lucia intercepted the tray with the same bright smile. "Mr. Kern is on a special diet now. Doctor's orders. I'll make sure he gets exactly what he needs." She delivered cold miso soup at 4 in the afternoon. John said nothing. What could he say? That his son's girlfriend was starving him? Samson wouldn't believe it. The staff was too afraid to confirm it. By the third day, John had lost visible weight. His hands trembled more. The medications he needed with food weren't being absorbed properly. When Samson noticed at dinner that week, concern crossed his face. "Dad, you look thin. Are you eating?" John opened his mouth, but Lucia was faster. "He's been so difficult about his meals," she said, placing her hand on Samson's arm. "I've been trying to help, bringing him food personally, but he refuses to eat when I'm there. I think he's still upset about our conversation." She looked at John with perfect manufactured concern. "I'm worried about you, father. Please, you need to keep your strength up." The word, father, landed like acid. John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Because he saw it now, the trap. If he accused her, it would look like exactly what she'd just described, a sick old man being difficult, refusing help out of spite. Samson squeezed Lucia's hand. "Thank you for trying. Dad, please, eat. If not for yourself, for me." Lucia smiled at John across the table. And John understood that this was just the beginning. If this story is keeping you hooked, smash that like button and drop a comment telling us what you'd do in Samson's position. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because things are about to get dark. The beginning of the end started not with violence, but with whispers in the dark. 2 weeks into the starvation campaign, Lucia lay beside Samson in bed, her fingers tracing lazy patterns across his bare chest. Outside, Sol's lights glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, she was planting poison. "I've been thinking about your father," she said softly. Samson's body tensed slightly. "What about him? Just how much you sacrifice for him." Her fingers continued their gentle movement, soothing, hypnotic. The medical bills, the full-time staff, the specialists flying in from Switzerland every month. It must cost a fortune. "He's my father. Of course. And you're a good son." She shifted closer, her voice warm honey. "I just wonder sometimes, is it fair to you? You're building an empire, expanding into new territories, and so much of your resources go to keeping him comfortable. He built this family. Everything I have is because of him. I know, but he's already lived his life, hasn't he?" She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with eyes full of manufactured concern. "He's 68. He's had a stroke. The doctors say another one could come any time. And when it does," she let the sentence hang. "When it does, what?" Samson asked. "I'm just saying, imagine what you could do with those resources. What we could do. The territories you could expand into. The legitimate businesses you could acquire. The legacy you could build that's entirely yours, not just maintaining his." Samson said nothing, and in that silence, Lucia heard permission. "He's suffering, Samson. Anyone can see it. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let someone go with dignity instead of dragging it out. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. She kissed his shoulder gently. I'm just saying you don't have to carry this weight forever. There are places, facilities, where he could be more comfortable. Where professionals could care for him full-time. You could visit whenever you want, but you wouldn't have to watch him deteriorate every single day. You mean put him in a home? I mean give yourself permission to live your life. Her hand moved to his face, turning him to look at her. You've been loyal. You've been dutiful. But at some point, you have to choose your future over his past. The words settled into Samson's mind like sediment. He didn't agree, didn't nod, but he didn't reject the idea either. And Lucia smiled in the darkness. Because she'd learned something important about manipulation. You don't need someone to say yes. You just need them not to say no. Over the next week, she'd mention it again. And again. Each time softer, gentler, more reasonable. Until the idea didn't feel like hers anymore. Until it felt like his own. But what Lucia didn't know was that her time was running out faster than she thought. Because somewhere in that house, John was making plans of his own. John's plans would have to wait, because Lucia was moving faster than anyone anticipated. Within a month, she'd convinced Samson that expanding operations required his personal attention. You can't build an empire from home, she'd whispered. The Busan territory needs you there. Show them you're not your father, you're the future. Samson left for 3 days. Then 5. Then a full week. And the moment his car disappeared down the mansion's long driveway, Lucia's mask shattered completely. She descended the grand staircase at 9 a.m., still in her silk robe, and found the household staff assembled for their morning briefing. The head of security, the kitchen manager, the housekeepers, all people who'd served the Kern family for decades. Things are changing, Lucia announced from the top of the stairs, her voice echoing through the marble foyer. I am the lady of this house now. What I say goes. Is that understood? The staff exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Sampson, the head housekeeper began. Mr. Sampson put me in charge when he's away. Lucia descended slowly, each step deliberate. And I've noticed some inefficiencies that need correcting. Over the next 48 hours, she reassigned rooms, placing John's most loyal caretaker in the far servants' quarters. She changed security protocols, limiting who had access to John's wing. She dismissed the night nurse who'd been with the family for 12 years, claiming budget cuts. When Park, the head of security, questioned the changes, Lucia's smile turned to ice. Are you questioning me? Miss Lucia, these protocols were established by Mr. John for security. Mr. John had a stroke. His judgment is compromised. She stepped closer. And if you have a problem with my decisions, you're welcome to discuss it with Samson when he returns. Or you can leave now. Your choice. Park stayed silent. He had a family to feed. By the 3rd day, the mansion that had run with military precision for 3 generations was in chaos. Staff members whispered in corners. Security gaps appeared in the rotation. The carefully maintained order John had built was crumbling. But on the morning Samson was scheduled to return, Lucia worked magic. Dismissed staff were temporarily rehired. Rooms were restored. Security protocols reverted. When Samson's car pulled up, the mansion looked exactly as he'd left it. And Lucia stood at the door in a sundress, smiling like she'd spent the week reading books in the garden. Welcome home, she said, kissing him. We missed you. Samson saw nothing wrong. How could he? The performance was perfect. But in his room, John sat by the window, thinner than before, watching through the glass as his son embraced the woman who was systematically destroying everything he'd built. And John knew time was running out. If he was going to save his son, he'd need to do something drastic. Something Samson couldn't ignore. John's drastic move never came. Because 3 months into the relationship, Lucia stopped waiting for him to die naturally. It started small, easy to dismiss as accidents. Lucia entering John's room to help him to the bathroom, her hand gripping his weakened left arm just a bit too tight. Sorry, she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. You're more fragile than I thought. Walking past him in the hallway, her shoulder bumping his bad side hard enough to make him stumble. Oh, I didn't see you there. These hallways are so narrow. The staff noticed but said nothing. What could they say? She was the boss's girlfriend. They had families to feed. Then one afternoon, when Samson was in a meeting downtown, Lucia entered John's room and closed the door. John sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring at the garden he could no longer walk through. She didn't announce herself, just walked directly behind him and shoved the wheelchair forward so violently it nearly tipped. John grabbed the armrests, his heart racing. "You're going to die soon anyway," Lucia said, her voice casual, conversational. "Why not make it easier on everyone?" She walked around to face him, crouching down so they were eye level. "Your son doesn't believe you." She tilted her head, studying him like an insect. "Every time you try to warn him, he takes my side." "Do you know why?" John's hands trembled, but he met her eyes. "Because he's desperate," she continued. "Desperate and lonely and so starved for real connection that he can't see what's right in front of him. You raised a powerful man, John. But you also raised a weak one. He'll see through you," John managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Will he?" Lucia laughed softly. "I could walk in there right now and tell him you tried to hit me, and he'd believe me over you. I could say you're having delusions from the medication, and he'd increase your dose. I could push you down these stairs, and everyone would call it a tragic accident." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her hands. "You're already dead, old man. You're just too stubborn to lie down." When she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "Oh, and your dinner tonight?" "I'm thinking cold noodles. Around midnight, if I remember." The door clicked shut, and John sat alone in the silence, his whole body shaking. She was right about one thing: he couldn't fight back. Couldn't raise his voice loud enough to be heard beyond these walls. Couldn't physically defend himself. But she was wrong about another. Because while Lucia had been busy playing queen, John had been making phone calls with the strength he had left. Calls to people who owed him favors. People who understood loyalty ran deeper than fear. People who could get him exactly what he needed. The question was, would it arrive before she escalated from cruelty to something far worse? John's secret calls would bear fruit, but not in the way he expected. Because the person who would save him wasn't one of his old contacts. It was his son. Samson stood in the mansion's foyer with his overnight bag, Lucia adjusting his collar with a smile that should have felt warm but somehow didn't. 3 days in Busan, she said. The shipping route negotiations, right? Right. He kissed her forehead, but something felt off. He couldn't name it. "I'll take good care of your father while you're gone. Make sure he eats, takes his medication. You don't need to worry about anything here." That was it. That was the feeling. She was too eager for him to leave. Samson had survived 15 years in a world where hesitation meant death because he trusted his instincts. The same instincts that told him when a deal was a setup, when a handshake hid a knife, when someone's smile was a mask for betrayal. Those instincts had been silent for 6 months, drowned out by loneliness and need. But standing there, watching Lucia's perfect performance, they screamed. He thought about the staff's nervous glances when Lucia entered a room. The way conversations stopped when she appeared. His father's rapid deterioration, 15 pounds lost in 3 months. The night nurse who'd suddenly quit without saying goodbye. "Actually, I should check on Dad before I go," Samson said slowly. Something flickered across Lucia's face. Too fast to catch, but there. "He's sleeping. You'll wake him. I'll be quiet." He climbed the stairs, Lucia following close behind. When he entered John's room, what he saw made his blood run cold. His father sat by the window, skeletal. The man who'd once commanded respect through presence alone now looked like he'd aged 20 years in 3 months. "Dad?" John's eyes opened, and in them Samson saw something he'd been too blind to see before: fear. Not of death. Fear of what was happening while everyone looked away. Samson returned to the foyer in silence. Lucia was already talking, explaining about John refusing meals, about his medication affecting his appetite, about how she'd been trying so hard to help but... "I need to make a call," Samson interrupted. He dialed Park, his head of security, and walked into his study. Closed the door. "I need cameras installed in my father's wing. Hidden. Motion activated. And Park? Tell absolutely no one. Not even me, officially." "Sir? Just do it. Before I leave for the airport." 2 hours later, Samson stood at Incheon Airport, boarding pass in hand, looking back at the city skyline. In his world, trust was a liability. Verification was survival. For 6 months, he'd broken his own rules. He boarded the plane to Busan, but his mind stayed in Seoul. And 48 hours later, Park would make a call that would change everything. Sir, you need to see this. We're at the breaking point now. If this story has you gripped, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what you think Samson should do next. And subscribe. You won't want to miss how this ends. Park's voice on the phone was careful, controlled, but Samson heard what lay beneath it. Fear. Not for himself. Fear of what he'd discovered. You need to see this. 4 words that would destroy everything Samson thought he knew. He took the next flight back to Seoul, landing at Incheon at 2 in the morning. He didn't go to the mansion. Instead, he met Park at a secure office in Gangnam, the kind of place where sensitive business was discussed and secrets were kept behind soundproof walls and encrypted servers. Park had the footage loaded on a laptop, his face drawn and exhausted like he hadn't slept since making the call. Sir, I don't know how to prepare you for this. Just show me. Park pressed play. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago. The camera angle captured John's bedroom from the corner, grainy but clear enough. John sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the garden he could no longer walk through, his frail silhouette backlit by moonlight. Then Lucia entered the frame. There was no hesitation. No gradual escalation. No pretense of checking on him or offering help. She walked directly across the room, and before John could even turn his head fully, she slapped him hard enough to snap his face sideways. The sound cracked through the speakers like a gunshot. Samson's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. I'm so tired of looking at your pathetic face, Lucia said on the screen, her voice clear and cold. Not the soft, loving voice she used with Samson. This was someone else entirely. Someone he'd never met. John tried to speak, but she grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. Samson's mine now. This house is mine. Everything you built is mine. And there's nothing you can do about it. She hit him again. And again. When John tried to wheel himself away, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and jerked it backward violently, nearly tipping him onto the floor. His cane clattered away, out of reach. He tried to grab for it, his trembling hand stretching, but she kicked it further away. Please. John's voice was barely a whisper, broken and small. Please what? Please stop? Lucia laughed, and the sound made Samson's stomach turn. Why would I? Who's going to stop me? Certainly not your son. He's so desperate for love that he can't see what's right in front of him. She walked to his nightstand and picked up the medication bottles lined up there. 5 different prescriptions, heart medication, blood thinners, anti-seizure drugs. The things keeping John alive. One by one, she opened them and dumped the contents into the trash bin. Let's see how you do without these for a few days, she said, smiling at John's horrified expression. Oh, don't look at me like that. You're already dying. I'm just helping things along. Samson watched, unable to breathe, unable to move, as the woman he'd defended for 6 months, the woman he'd chosen over his own father's warnings, systematically tortured a helpless old man. 17 minutes. The footage lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes of hitting, mocking, threatening. 17 minutes of cruelty so casual it was clear this wasn't the first time. Maybe not even the 10th time. This was routine for her. This was what she did when he wasn't there to see. When the footage finally ended with Lucia leaving the room, closing the door softly behind her like she'd just tucked John in for the night, Samson sat in silence. Park didn't speak. What could he say? The rage that filled Samson was unlike anything he'd experienced in 15 years of violence. This wasn't business. This wasn't territory or money or respect. This was personal in a way that made every instinct scream for blood. In his world, betrayal was handled with bullets and shallow graves. His first thought was to make Lucia disappear so thoroughly that forensic teams would find nothing but questions. He knew a dozen ways to make it look like an accident. 24 ways to make it look like she'd simply left Korea and never came back. His phone was in his hand before he realized it, finger hovering over a contact who specialized in making problems vanish. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of his father's voice saying, "I've buried men who fell for women like her." Maybe it was the shame of how completely blind he'd been. Maybe it was the need to understand how he'd failed so catastrophically. Or maybe it was the realization that killing her would be too easy. Too quick. Too merciful for what she'd done. Samson stood, his decision made. Where is she now? At the mansion. Sleeping in your bed. The words hit like a physical blow. Get the team ready, Samson said quietly. Bring her to the interrogation room. I want answers before I decide what happens next. Park nodded and made the call. And as Samson drove through Seoul's pre-dawn streets toward the mansion, he thought about the woman who'd played him perfectly. The woman who'd kissed him goodnight before going to torture his dying father. The woman who'd cried in his arms while starving an old man to death. The woman he'd thought he loved. By sunrise, she'd be in a concrete room with no windows, no phones, and no escape. And the real Samson Kern, the one she'd never actually met, would be waiting for her. The real Samson Kern arrived at the mansion just before dawn, and the woman sleeping peacefully in his bed had no idea what was coming. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He simply walked into the bedroom, flipped on every light, and stood at the foot of the bed with the cold stillness of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Lucia stirred, confused, squinting against the sudden brightness. When she saw him, she smiled, that same soft, loving smile she'd perfected over 6 months. You're back early, she said, her voice still thick with sleep. I missed. Get up. The coldness in his voice cut through her performance instantly. Her smile faltered. Samson, what's wrong? I said get up. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around her like armor, her eyes searching his face for some clue. Baby, you're scaring me. What happened in Busan? He said nothing, just watched her with eyes that had sentenced men to death and felt nothing. 2 of his men appeared in the doorway. Men she'd seen around the mansion but never paid attention to. Men whose loyalty to the Kern family went back decades. Escort her to the basement, Samson said. What? Samson, what is this? Lucia's voice rose, panic creeping in now. What's going on? Now. She tried to protest, tried to demand explanations, tried to turn on the tears that had worked so perfectly before. But the men gripped her arms firmly and walked her out of the room in her silk nightgown, down the stairs, through the mansion she'd claimed as her own, and into the basement level most people didn't know existed. The interrogation room was concrete and steel. A single table, 2 chairs, 1 bare light bulb, no windows, no cameras that she could see. This was where the Kern family asked questions and got answers by any means necessary. Lucia was placed in a chair, and the door locked behind her. She waited alone for 20 minutes, long enough for the fear to really set in, before Samson entered. He sat across from her, a tablet in his hands, his expression unreadable. I know what you did, he said simply. I don't know what you're talking about. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Samson, please, whatever someone told you. He slid the tablet across the table and pressed play. The timestamp. The bedroom. John by the window. And then Lucia walking in and slapping him hard enough to snap his head sideways. He watched her face as she watched herself on screen. Watched the color drain from her cheeks. Watched her eyes widen as she heard her own voice saying things she'd thought no one would ever hear. I'm so tired of looking at your pathetic face. The footage played for 17 minutes. 17 minutes of everything she'd done, everything she'd said, all the cruelty she'd inflicted when she thought no one was watching. When it finally ended, silence filled the room like poison gas. Lucia's expression had changed. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Not remorse. Not shame. Anger. Cold, calculated anger at being caught. He deserved it, she said flatly, her voice stripped of all pretense now. He tried to ruin us from day one. There is no us, Samson said, and the words came out like ice. There never was. That's not true. What we have is 6 months of you playing a role. And you played it well, I'll give you that. He leaned forward. But I want to know why. Why target me? Why torture my father? Why go through all of this? For a moment, she said nothing. Then something broke in her, not guilt, but the recognition that the game was over and there was no point in pretending anymore. You really want to know? She leaned back, crossing her arms. Fine. I researched the Kern family for 3 months before that auction. I knew your net worth, your weaknesses, your patterns. I knew you were lonely. Isolated. Desperate for someone who saw you as more than just a crime lord. So you became that person. I became exactly what you needed. There was almost pride in her voice. And it worked perfectly until your father got in the way. He saw through me immediately, and I knew if I didn't neutralize him, he'd eventually turn you against me. Neutralize him, Samson repeated. You mean kill him? I mean remove the obstacle. She shrugged, like they were discussing business strategy. I tried subtle at first, convince you to put him in a facility, let nature take its course. But you were too sentimental. So I had to accelerate things. By starving him, beating him, withholding his medication, by doing what needed to be done. She looked at him with something approaching defiance. You know how this world works, Samson. Weakness gets exploited. Your father was weak. You were weak because of him. I was making you stronger. The logic was so twisted, so sociopathic, that Samson almost laughed. And after he died? What then? Then we would have built something amazing together. Expanded your empire. Legitimized the business. You would have thanked me eventually. Thanked you. Yes. She leaned forward now, and for a brief moment, Samson saw a flicker of the woman he'd thought he loved. Everything I did was for us. For our future. Your father was the past, holding you back with his old ways and his paranoia. He was right about you. Of course he was right. She smiled, cold and sharp. But you didn't believe him. Because I'm very good at what I do. 3 hours. For 3 hours, Samson questioned her, and the truth spilled out in fragments. She'd targeted wealthy men before, twice in New York, once in London. She'd got 'em close, taken what she could, and disappeared before they realized what happened. The Kern family was supposed to be her final score. The big one. Set for life money. She'd planned everything. Down to the tears, the fears, the perfectly timed vulnerability. The only thing she hadn't planned for was getting caught. When Samson finally stood to leave, Lucia's mask slipped one last time. What are you going to do to me? For the first time, real fear entered her voice. Samson looked at her, this woman who'd fooled him completely, who'd tortured his father, who'd played him like an instrument for 6 months, and felt absolutely nothing. I don't know yet, he said. But first, I need to talk to my father. He left her in that concrete room and climbed the stairs to John's wing, dreading the conversation ahead. Because he'd have to admit that his father had been right all along. And he'd have to face what that admission would cost. The conversation Samson dreaded would become the one that changed everything he thought he knew about power. John was awake when Samson entered his room, sitting by the window as always, watching the garden he could no longer walk through. The early morning light made him look even more fragile than the surveillance footage had shown, skeletal, diminished, a shadow of the man who'd once commanded fear with a glance. But when he turned to look at his son, his eyes were clear and steady. I arrested her, Samson said without preamble, his voice hollow and worn from 3 hours of interrogation. She's in the basement. She'll never hurt you again. I promise you that. He expected relief, gratitude, maybe even vindication, the satisfaction of being proven right after months of being dismissed as paranoid. Instead, John shook his head slowly. Release her. Samson stared, certain he'd misheard. What? Let her go, son. After everything she did to you? To us? Samson's voice rose with disbelief. She tortured you, starved you, beat you. She was trying to kill you, and you want me to just let her walk away? John reached out, his trembling hand finding Samson's, gripping it with what little strength remained. If you lock her up, if you execute her, if you make her disappear the way our world handles these things, you'll carry that forever. And she's not worth that burden. She deserves to pay. She will. John's voice was quiet but certain. Every day for the rest of her life, she'll be the woman who had everything within reach and lost it all because she couldn't see past dollar signs. That emptiness inside her that made her do this? That's her punishment, Samson. It'll follow her everywhere she goes, in every relationship she tries to build, in every mirror she looks into. She'll die alone with nothing but regrets and the knowledge that she destroyed her own chance at something real. Samson pulled his hand away, pacing to the window. You're asking me to show mercy to someone who showed you none. I'm asking you to be better than what this world made us. John's voice carried the weight of 50 years of violence and regret. I've killed men for less than what she did. I've buried people for disrespect, for disloyalty, for simply being in the way. And you want to know what I learned from all those bodies? Samson turned, waiting. That revenge is easy. Any fool with a gun can get revenge. But wisdom? Knowing when to walk away. That's power, Samson. Real power. The kind that doesn't come from fear or violence. She tried to kill you. No. John shook his head. She tried to break my spirit. She failed. I'm still here. Still myself. Still able to teach my son the lesson I should have taught him years ago. He paused, gathering strength. I tried to tell you from the beginning, Samson. She was never interested in caring for someone. Only in what they could give her. That fundamental flaw in her character, that's what destroyed her, not you, not me. She did this to herself. Samson felt something crack in his chest, all the rage and shame and guilt spilling out at once. I should have listened to you. I should have seen. You saw what you needed to see at the time. John's voice softened. You were lonely. You wanted connection. There's no shame in that. The shame is in what she chose to do with that vulnerability. But I chose her over you. I believed her lies over your truth. And now you know better. John leaned forward, his eyes intense despite his physical weakness. What I need from you isn't revenge, Samson. It's for you to learn from this. To understand that love without respect is just need wearing a disguise. To see people clearly before you let them into your life, into your heart. To know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can give them. Samson sat down heavily in the chair beside his father, the weight of 6 months of blindness crushing down on him. How'd I just let her go after what she did? Because killing her, imprisoning her, making her suffer, none of that changes what happened. None of that heals what she broke. It just adds more weight to shoulders already carrying too much. John squeezed his son's hand again. I survived 50 years in this world not just because I knew when to fight, but because I knew when to walk away. When to let karma do the work violence can't. What if she does this to someone else? Then that's on her conscience, not yours. You can't save the world from every predator, son. You can only save yourself from becoming one. The words settled into Samson like stones dropping into still water. He thought about the man he'd become in those interrogation hours, cold, calculating, ready to make Lucia disappear without a trace. The same man his father had been. The same cycle of violence that had defined 3 generations of Kern men. And he thought about what it would cost to break that cycle. If I let her go, Samson said slowly, she wins. No. John's smile was sad but certain. She loses everything. Her mark, her score, her future. She walks away with nothing but the memory of how close she came. That's not winning, Samson. That's the worst kind of defeat, knowing you had everything and threw it away through your own greed and cruelty. Samson looked at his father, weak in body but unbroken in spirit, and understood finally what real strength looked like. Not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to choose not to. You're sure about this? Samson asked. I'm sure that I don't want my son becoming someone he'll hate in 10 years. I'm sure that she's already been punished by losing access to this family. And I'm sure that you and I have more important things to do than waste time on someone who was never worth it in the first place. Samson nodded slowly, the decision settling into place. It felt wrong and right at the same time, unsatisfying but somehow clean. 3 hours later, Lucia would be escorted to Incheon Airport with 1 suitcase and a one-way ticket. But first, Samson had one more thing he needed to say. I'm sorry, Dad, for not believing you, for choosing her over your warnings. For everything. John pulled his son close, and for the first time in months, Samson felt the embrace of unconditional love. The kind that forgives, that endures, that sees all your failures and loves you anyway. You're my son, John whispered. There's nothing to forgive. And in that moment, Samson learned that the strongest bonds aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that break and heal stronger than before. We've reached the end of this incredible story. If it moved you, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what lesson you're taking away. And don't forget to subscribe. We have more powerful stories coming your way. The strongest bonds aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that heal stronger than before. And 3 hours after that embrace, Samson proved his father's wisdom by doing the hardest thing he'd ever done. He let her go. Lucia was brought from the basement, still in her silk nightgown, escorted by 2 of Samson's most trusted men. She'd been given 15 minutes to pack 1 suitcase from the room she'd claimed as hers. Nothing more. No jewelry from the family vault. No designer clothes Samson had bought her. Just the things she'd brought with her 6 months ago when the con began. Park handed her a plane ticket. One way to Los Angeles. Departing in 3 hours. The rules are simple, Samson said, his voice flat and emotionless. You never return to Korea. You never contact me or anyone in my organization. You never speak publicly about this family. Break any of these rules, and the mercy my father showed you today will be the last mercy you ever receive. Do you understand? Lucia nodded, her face carefully blank. No tears now. No pleas. The mask had been stripped away completely, and what remained was just a woman who'd gambled everything and lost. Why? She asked quietly. Why not just kill me? Because my father taught me something you'll never understand, Samson replied. That some punishments are worse than death. Living with what you've lost, knowing it was your own greed that destroyed it, that's your sentence. She was escorted to a black sedan, the suitcase placed in the trunk. As the car pulled away down the long driveway, Lucia didn't look back. Not once. She just stared straight ahead, already calculating her next move, her next target, because people like her never really learned. But that wasn't Samson's problem anymore. He found his father in the garden, the one John had been staring at through windows for months. With help from his physical therapist, John had managed to walk outside for the first time since the stroke, leaning heavily on his cane but standing nonetheless. Samson approached slowly and stood beside him, the early morning sun breaking over Seoul's skyline, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It's done, Samson said. She's gone. John nodded, his hand trembling as he gripped the cane. How do you feel? Empty, angry, ashamed. Samson paused, but also, lighter, somehow. That's wisdom settling in where rage used to live. John looked at his son, and despite the physical weakness, his eyes held the strength of a man who'd survived 50 years of war. You chose mercy over violence. That takes more courage than pulling a trigger. I wanted to kill her. I know. I raised you in a world where that would have been expected. Celebrated, even. John's voice softened. But you chose differently. You chose better. They stood in silence, watching the sunrise paint the garden in light. Two men who'd survived different wars, one of territory and blood, the other of manipulation and betrayal, finally understanding each other completely. Dad, Samson said quietly, I'm sorry. For everything. For not listening. For choosing wrong. For almost losing you because I was too blind to see. John's trembling hand found Samson's arm, gripping it with surprising strength. You didn't lose me, son. You found yourself. And that's worth more than being right. Samson helped his father back toward the house, the older man's weight against his arm a reminder of both fragility and resilience. John's body had been weakened by stroke and abuse, but his spirit remained unbroken. And in that moment, Samson understood what real power looked like. It wasn't in the fear he commanded or the empire he controlled. It wasn't in the violence he could unleash or the money he could spend. Real power was standing in a garden at sunrise with his father, both of them scarred and imperfect and still standing, having chosen wisdom over revenge and love over pride. The mansion behind them had been reclaimed. The predator had been expelled. And the lesson had been learned at a cost Samson would never forget. Love without respect was just need wearing a disguise. And the strongest love wasn't the one that felt easy. It was the one that survived the truth.